In the next 10 minutes. So those of us that are taking breakfast, we ask that you wind up so that we can begin at exactly 9. Okay? So in the next 10 minutes, we start off. Thank you.
Huh? It's more neutral for everyone. Yeah, it's more neutral for everyone.
Na hiyo limekuwa linabeti kabla ya photography kwa mbele mpaka nikafurahia watu walioanza na photography.
give you the cue to start. Just
So it is 9. And therefore we start. So I would want to request that we be upstanding so that we can do a national anthem. Thank you. I think we'll only do the first stanza. So karibuni sana to this event where we'll be launching the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. And I think before we start, we want to request that we do a quick round of introductions. So you will tell us your name and the institution that you are representing at this launch. And we'll begin at the table right behind.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Deborah Dulo from Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sophie Simiyu. I'm here representing Fresh Produce Exporters Association of Kenya.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Raymond Malenche. I work with Kenya Bankers Association.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alfred Mwashuga from ESCC.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Fiona Filma from Kenya National Commission of Human Rights.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jane Mino from Shepherds Council Office on Africa.
Good morning. My name is Pauline Luku. I'm here to represent the Shepherds Council of Eastern Africa.
Morning, Geoffrey Correa, work with the Dutch Embassy.
Good morning, everyone. Laurel Mulwa from East Africa.
Morning, everyone. Masai Joseph Kigoje.
Good morning, everyone. Benedict Teto, AG.
Morning, all. My name is Paul.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dennis Ngure, United Disabled Persons of Kenya.
Morning, Jeff, Bristol Ventures Events.
Morning, Michael Ochieng, Bristol Ventures.
Good morning, Alice, Service Provider.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sabo Ahmed. I work with the Office of the Attorney General and Department of Justice.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amina Winnie, Office of the Attorney General.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mwati, Department of Justice.
Good morning, Rolf Lemayan, Business Registration Service.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm being asked that a request as you introduce to stand up so that you can be seen, apart from hearing your voice. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Iris Boke. I work at GSF, the Program on Combating Illicit Financial Services. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Diane Oditi from Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
Good morning. My name is Patrick Lavens, Legal Counsel, Kenya Private Sector Alliance, CAPSA.
Good morning. My name is Joy Michelle, representing CAPSA. Good morning, my name is Paula Norman and I'm from the German Embassy.
Good morning, I'm Dilara Marquardt and I'm from the German Embassy as well.
Good morning, my name is Grace Mboko. I'm from the Royal William Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law.
Good morning, Esther Yongo from Global Compact Central Kenya.
Good morning, Stella Wangeshi, Gender and Human Rights Manager, Kakuzi PLC.
Good morning, Mercy Obonyo, Network of African National Human Rights Institutions.
Good morning, I'm Greenspan Dudo from the Pressman Media.
Hello, Kapambi Gichungia from the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights.
Good morning, I'm Sherry Cheruspi from Kenya National Commission on Human Rights.
Good morning, my name is John Theory from the National Steering Committee on Implementation of Alternative Justice Systems.
Good morning, Josephine Kagushia from the National Gender and Equality Commission.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gloria Lunga, Kenya National Commission on Human Rights.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jackie Chenza, Kenya National Commission on Human Rights.
Mabibi na mabwana hamjambo. Alex Njoroge from the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights.
Good morning, Charles Mwambuza from the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights.
Good morning. My name is Joseph Biku from the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights.
Hi everyone, my name is Samuel Lee. I work for Transparency International Kenya. Thank you.
Yes, good morning everyone. My name is Dennis Otieno. I work for FIDA Kenya.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick Karanja. I work with Advocates for International Development.
Good morning, my name is Bernard Ochieng. I work with the Danish Institute for Human Rights.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Victor Kanga from Public Procurement Review Authority.
Morning, Bokayo Sora from UNDP.
Morning, everyone. My name is Martin Namasaka from UNDP.
Dan Juma from UNDP.
Morning, George Morara, formerly Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, but now with the British High Commission.
Good morning, my name is Furaha Charo, working for the Kenya Human Rights Commission.
Good morning, my name is Mary Tambo, also working with the Kenya Human Rights Commission.
Frederick Ouma, Transparency International.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gladys Ogana from the UN Human Rights Office.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Leras Mao, Kenya National Commission on Human Rights.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Hannah Carlson. I'm from the Embassy of Sweden. I'm the first secretary there, working with human rights and democracy.
Good morning, all. My name is Joyce Chelagat. I work at the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
Morning, everyone. My name is Malika Hogan from the Embassy of Sweden.
Good morning, everyone. Joseph Kimani from the Danish Embassy.
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Choge from the State Department of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Judy Gino with the Global Compact Network Kenya.
Good morning, partners. I'm Patrick Nyengwezo. I work with the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry as the Chief Executive Officer. Asanteni sana.
Good morning. My name is Thomas Kibunza. I work with the Office of the Attorney General, Department of Justice. Thank you.
Good morning, all.
My name is Cyril Marcotte, represent the Judiciary Committee on Alternative Justice Systems.
Good morning, I'm Migdal Hassan Nando for Wakihi Potential Limited.
Good morning, Gunaron, Ambassador of Norway.
Good morning, Marianne Jokimani, Department of Justice.
Good morning, Patrick Egloff, Embassy of Switzerland.
Good morning, I'm Sarah Bonaya, Commissioner of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights.
Good morning, I'm Lei Fang from the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights.
Thank you very much, everyone. And our CEO now has not introduced himself, but he'll be coming to do that as he makes his opening remarks. So I want to thank you for that session, and you'll notice that we have a good representation of all that is required for the business that we are going to undertake today. So feel most welcome, and I want to invite our CEO, Dr. Leonard Mogesa, just to officially welcome you as we get to the next session. Karibu Daktari.
Thank you very much, Samson. May I take this opportunity to welcome all of you, development partners, civil society organizations, business community, representatives from government, and the hotel personnel as well. Members of the Fourth Estate feel most welcome. I won't call you by name, I will actually be repeating them. For the interest of time, I welcome all of you, and I call upon James Mwenda to bring forth the facilitator to give us an overview of what we are doing here today with regards to the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. James Mwenda, take over please. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Thank you, everyone. We now go to the program in terms of the content, and I want to introduce Wakili Thomas Kibunja, who will take us through the UNGPs, the framework that produced the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. Welcome, Kibunja.
Okay, thank you, Mwenda, for that. I think members present have already heard my name, but for the sake of the record, my name is Thomas Kifunja. I am a Senior State Counsel with the Office of the Attorney General, and I'll be taking us through an overview of the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, as long as the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. So, that's essentially the objectives of this presentation. So what are the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights? Essentially, this is a set of principles, about 31 of them, that were endorsed by the United Nations Human Rights Council in 2011, and they set a series of standards that businesses are supposed to adhere to, not just businesses in the realm of the private sector, but state-owned enterprises as well. So these standards hope to address some of the governance issues that have been noticed in the years prior to the United Nations guiding principles, and they also call on states to domesticate these principles within their own national context, which is why we're here today to celebrate the domestication of these United Nations guiding principles with our National Action Plan. So they are regarded as the most authoritative statement of human rights duties or responsibilities of states and corporations adopted at the United Nations level. So these principles are further broken down into a number of pillars, which we shall be looking at shortly. Businesses, but as states themselves. Because one thing we have come to notice is the state is one of the largest businesses in most of our jurisdictions, in most of our countries. A lot of business is done at state level through the procurement of services, the procurement of goods, and so the state has to lead the way in a sense, in terms of ensuring that we really inculcate respect for human rights within our spheres of influence. So why UNGPs in the first place? From what we can see here, this is an illustration. We have a bit of a scenario there playing out. It reads, look at that devastation, son. there's almost nothing left of the natural world. I'm counting on you to squeeze the last scraps of profit out of it. So essentially what we are trying to espouse for, or what we are trying to lobby for, is that in order for us to do business and do it sustainably, we need to also be mindful of our human rights impacts, our human rights duties. So rather than just milking the last cent, the last profit from that industry, from that space, we need to make sure that we're doing it in a sustainable manner and in respect of the human rights impacts that we do pose in our various capacities, in our various businesses. So they are aimed at tackling and preventing business-related human rights abuses by closing governance gaps in the largely unrestrained global market economy. So as globalization continues being something we are all living in today in the 21st century, we're seeing businesses moving into new markets, not just operating within their jurisdictions, but extraterritorially. So in that event, we have business now operating in areas where perhaps they may have a weak governance structure. They may even have a structure that is lacking entirely. So what are the responsibilities of that business in that area? Do they just say that there are no laws, so I can operate as I wish? Do they just hire slave labor, child labor? So what we are advocating for is that businesses need to know and they need to respect their business rights responsibilities or their human rights responsibilities, regardless of where they operate. So UNGPs, what are the characteristics of these principles? They apply to all states and to all business enterprises, both transnational and others, regardless of their size, sector, location, ownership, and structure. Right? So the responsibilities that we are talking about here to respect human rights, they cut across. Remember, when you look at the International Human Rights Framework, human rights are due to us by nature of our dignity, our humanity. They are not accrued by, or they are not granted to us by a state. So regardless of the size of this enterprise, there are certain human rights duties that we all have, even from our home. When we hire additional help, do we respect the labor rights of these people? When we look at the issues with migrant workers. So as we can see, the UNGPs will apply across the board, not just with states at the high level or transnational corporations, but they will also impact on even the day-to-day operations of some of the medium-sized enterprises and so on. They are interrelated, should be read individually and collectively in terms of the objective of enhancing standards and practices regardless or regarding business and human rights. So they are interrelated. We cannot pick and choose which of these principles we want to adhere to, right? At the end of the day, in terms of for us to be able to realize the objectives and the goals of the United Nations Guiding Principles, we need to make sure that we are able to apply each of these principles interrelatedly. They do not create new international law obligations, say for calling on states to domesticate the United Nations Guiding Principles through their national action plans. It's not a new international law treaty. It does not have the binding force of law. However, these are principles that already build on existing responsibilities. We have about 9 human rights treaties internationally, with various states being members to some of them. And what the United Nations Guiding Principles is that they build on these existing legal instruments and try and simplify them in a way that creates a standard within which businesses can operate. They should be implemented in an undiscriminatory manner, with particular attention to the rights and needs of populations at risk of becoming vulnerable and marginalized. What individuals, the needs of those who are in marginalized communities. So the United Nations Guiding Principles, they require us to, as we do our business, as we run our business enterprises, we need to look at the differentiated impacts of what we do. Not just looking at, in general, I have built a road, I have built a school, but is that school accessible to persons with disabilities, for instance? So these are the pillars that are found within the United Nations Guiding Principle. principles, we have the state duty to protect, the corporate responsibility to respect, as well as access to remedy. So in terms of the first duty, which is the state duty to protect, it describes the duty of the state to protect those under its jurisdiction from human rights violations, whether committed by public or private sectors. This can be achieved, for instance, through legislative and administrative processes. Then under the corporate responsibility to respect human rights, this is the responsibility of all businesses to respect human rights by ensuring due diligence is exercised in their operations to avoid causing harm to individuals or communities. It also calls on businesses to take positive measures to enhance the enjoyment of human rights. Then lastly, we have access to remedy. This emphasizes the responsibility of states and the corporate sector to ensure that victims of human rights violations have access to effective remedies, and this can be achieved through judicial and non-judicial grievance handling mechanisms. So if we break down these pillars a bit more to understand them. So under the state duty to protect human rights, at the end of the day, the international human rights framework is primarily binding on states. That is why when you look at some of these, like for instance, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, and so on and so forth, their main jurisdiction is the realm of states. They regulate how states are supposed to ensure, enhance the enjoyment of human rights. But then, borrowing from that, what the United Nations Guiding Principles dictate is that the primary responsibility of ensuring that human rights are enjoyed within the jurisdiction of the state will be borne by the state. The state cannot applicate this duty, say for instance in the provision of education, by privatizing public schools and saying these schools are now being run by private entities, so the state is no longer liable in terms of providing education. The state cannot do that because ultimately the buck will stop at the state level. Then, in terms of how then can the state ensure this, the duty to protect is achieved, it could be by ensuring that enough legislation is passed, by ensuring that institutions are created, operationalized, that are supposed to ensure and enhance the realization of these rights, and by punishing and ensuring redress to those that violate these rights. So that is the duty of the state and Pillar 1. Then in terms of Pillar 2, that's the corporate responsibility to protect, to respect. So this is binding on corporate enterprises, on businesses. They're supposed to ensure that due diligence is exercised in the operations to avoid causing harm to individuals or communities. So what we mean by human rights due diligence we'll expound on a bit further in the coming slides. But it also calls on corporates to take measures to enhance the enjoyment of human rights. So essentially what we're saying here is that corporates need to know their human rights impacts, and they need to show that they are taking positive steps to ensure that these impacts are either mitigated or addressed. And companies must, in terms of conducting human rights due diligence, which is not that different from when I think we've come to all be aware of the environmental impact assessments. So this would be similar to that in terms of how it is conducted and the goal or the end objective. So the end objective is that companies must be able to identify, prevent, and mitigate, and also account for how they address such human rights impacts. So if I'm in the extractive sector, for instance, as a mining company, what some of the risks that I must take into account is that I may end up displacing a certain community. So when operations are being designed in this business venture, the company must be mindful of this impact, put in place measures to mitigate against the displacement of this community. We need to be able to ensure that the community is engaged. Have we gotten the participation of this community in determining perhaps, how will they be remedied? Where will they be relocated to? Are they willing to relocate? In terms of how the resources will be shared. These are some of the questions that such an organization must be mindful of. And this is essentially what we are calling human rights due diligence. So, in terms of how we further human rights due diligence, the company must start at policy level. There must be a commitment by this enterprise, be it state-owned, be it privately owned, that we are going to inculcate respect for human rights within our operations. So it will start with that policy commitment. Then the company must be able to assess what our human rights impacts, what are human rights risks. So this will be specific to the context of this enterprise. Then we must be able to track and communicate our performance. This goes towards transparency and accountability. Otherwise, if we just do these assessments and retain them in our cabinets for filing, then it may not really achieve the goal that it is meant to achieve. Then we must have a grievance and remedy handling mechanism. So this mechanism will ensure that in the event that we do have grievances or complaints, which it is likely that we will have, then what measures have we put in place to ensure that we are able to provide effective remedies? Then integrating and embedding respect for human rights in our operations. So once we have known our risks, once we have known our impacts, and we've identified the measures that we need to put in place, then for us to be able to conduct our business operations and do it sustainably, we need to be able to integrate these the principles that we've talked about, respect for human rights within our various sectors, within our various operations. So the third pillar, this is access to remedy. This can be done through judicial and non-judicial grievance handling mechanisms. This could be through the courts, for instance, tribunals. It could be even through our own internal grievance handling mechanisms, which may differ depending on the organization. But essentially, it emphasizes the responsibility of states and the corporate sector to ensure that victims of human rights violations have access to effective remedies. Remember, if we have a competent internal grievance handling mechanism, it's unlikely that you will even need now recourse to judicial remedies out there. And we all know if you are able to handle some of these grievances internally and do it effectively, then it may save on other negative consequences that may follow judicial engagement. It could be the reputation of the organization will be impacted. There could be liability in terms of monetary terms that can otherwise be averted through a proper internal grievance handling mechanism. Then, in terms of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, so remember the UNGPs called on states to domesticate the principles within their own national context, which is what Kenya did. And it was able to enact a National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. So this is an evolving policy document. It's a living document that is developed by a state or to protect against adverse human rights impacts by business enterprises in conformity with the United Nations Guiding Principles of Business and Human Rights. So the National Action Plan that we're here to launch today is founded on the UNGPs. The spirit of the UNGPs is living within the document, and it is also country-specific, right? And it is a living document in terms of the fact that it will be reviewed from time to time so that it is able to adapt to the changing needs of society, the changing needs of the country. In terms of how this document was developed, once the United Nations Guiding Principles were endorsed in 2011, in 2014 there was a call on states to actually domesticate the UNGPs within their national action plans. And Kenya also during its second cycle review before the Universal Periodic process, one of the recommendations was that we actually enact a national action plan. So Kenya accepted that recommendation, and I think that was about 2015. So in 2016, a national steering committee was established. This is under the office of the AG, and also in partnership with the Kenya National Human Rights Commission. It was a multi-sectoral steering committee made up of various actors across government and also beyond government. So the steering committee was charged with developing a national action plan. So one of the first steps that was done was to conduct a national baseline survey. So the survey was supposed to assess the current implementation status of the UNGPs, as well as identifying some of the relevant business and human rights frameworks that are already in existence. So essentially what we needed to understand is the situation on the ground, so that then we can now take it up from there. Then between 2016 and 2018, there was a lot that was done in the form of stakeholder engagement across the country. During this stakeholder engagement process, we were able to identify some of the key issues that were put forth by members of society at various levels. And these issues actually are the ones that inform the next stage, which is the drafting and validation of the National Action Plan. So what were the objectives of the NAP? So the objectives are to guide the state in fulfilling its duty to protect individuals and communities from business-related human rights abuses, to guide businesses on the measures they should undertake to meet their responsibility to respect human rights in their operations, to promote human rights due diligence by businesses in preventing adverse impacts on people, to strengthen access to state-based judicial and non-judicial remedies for victims of business-related harm. So during the stakeholder engagement that we mentioned earlier, a number of themes were identified. There were a number of issues were flagged during this engagement with society, with the members of the public at various stages, and these issues made their way onto the NAP. These are the areas that were identified in terms of a matter of priority that need to be addressed. And they include land and natural resources. So here we had issues arising such as voluntary and compulsory acquisition, land acquisition. We had issues surrounding the sharing of revenue, especially in the extractives industry. We had issues of access to land by the marginalized, including women. Then another area, or thematic area that was identified was environmental protection. Here, issues to do with pollution. Some of the organizations that are operating within our communities were being, or rather there are complaints that they were being involved in pollution, where you have some of their effluents or some of the industrial products making their way into our rivers, into our homes, and of course having adverse impacts on our families. And of course the loss of biodiversity. Then revenue, the other area that had been highlighted was revenue transparency. Here we have issues of illicit financial flows. Of course, corruption was a major issue. We have transparency or lack of transparency on contracts that had significant social and economic impact. So we had issues surrounding the fact that some of these contracts had not been made public, and thus were impacting on the ability of society to hold our leaders to account. Then we have labor rights. Here we have issues of sexual assault, recruitment. This is especially targeting our migrant worker sectors and some of these agencies that still were not operating within the regulations that they're supposed to operate under. And the last element, or the last theme that had been identified, was access to remedy. Here we had issues with access to courts, the cost of litigation, and the other area was safety of human rights defenders. So we had instances where human rights defenders are facing threats to their lives, to their property, because of what they do, which is raise some of these complaints. So as we sum up, the road so far, like you said, this road started in 2011, and we are here on the back of a lot of people who have worked diligently to ensure we have an app that we can be proud of. We have a document that is actually capable of being launched. So as we can see, as we track this journey through to 2021, we can now actually say that the NAP was approved by Cabinet and adopted by Parliament, and awarded, or rather, and slated as sessional paper number 3 of 2021. So since then, what have we been doing? So we have an implementation committee that has been established. The steering committee was essentially, its mandate was to develop an app. So we thought that it is important that this policy document does not just remain on a shelf somewhere gathering dust, but it's actually a document that we implement. So there's an implementation committee that has been given the mandate to ensure its implementation. So as that now, what we have been doing is the dissemination of the NAP, capacity building as well, on the UNGPs is actually ongoing. We have managed to come up with simplified versions of the NAP, both in English and Swahili. So that is where we are today, and I believe that is why we're here to launch this very important document. I beg to end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kibunja, for giving us the background of why we are here. And to just give a demonstration that there's a lot of work going on around the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. We'll have a very quick 20-minute session in which we'll have panelists picked from diverse sectors to demonstrate what they are doing, challenges they are facing, where they are headed, and what we expect, basically, and where we are placed in the global arena. So I'll quickly call upon the following. Clarice Kariuki, from the Department of Justice. She's a senior state counsel. Karibu, Clarice. Seras Maweu, the head of the division that is holding this mandate today from the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Judy Jin, from the UN Global Compact Kenya. Mr. Patrick Nyangweso, the CEO, Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Mary Kambo, from the Kenya Human Rights Commission. Not from the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, but from the Kenya Human Rights Commission. Let us brand each other well. Civil society organization. I can see many people from KHRC, former and present. And we have Gladys Oganga from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Okay. Thank you, CEO, for the protocols. So we'll basically touch on the responsibilities accorded in the NAP and the UNGPs in the implementation of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, but more so largely on the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And I'll begin with the host, the government of Kenya. Gladys Kariuki. The Pillar 1 is basically dedicated to the state. Its duty to protect human rights. And probably you can give some of the efforts that you are going through as a state in implementation of the NAP and of course the UNGP. Just a snippet of it.
Thank you very much, Maria, for that question. And thank you, Thomas, for your introductory presentation, which has pretty much given a background as to why we're here today. So, as you well put it, the UNGPs have the 3 pillars, and Pillar 1, of course, is dedicated to the state. In this discourse, we cannot forget that the state still remains the primary duty bearer to protect human rights of its citizens. So one of the things that I would say the government is doing in terms of ensuring that Pillar 1 is implemented and supported this is the state duty to protect human rights. One of the ways is, of course, through the actual inaction of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. And this is a policy document that is giving clear direction on what the state needs to do, what businesses need to do, and what happens when there is a violation. So enacting policies, in our case, starting with the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, is one of the ways that the state has endeavored to ensure Pillar 1 is met. Another way that I would like to highlight is, of course, having established the implementation committee. So not just enacting the policy, but ensuring it is actually being implemented. And and then of course by providing legislation to support the enaction of this policy document, and also legislation that will support the state duty to protect human rights from business violations. So one of the ways that, and one of the key policy actions in the National Action Plan, touching on legislation, is the state commits itself to develop guidelines for non-financial reporting, because we find that the Companies Act of Kenya has very clear guidelines and procedures on what financial reporting entails. But when it comes to non-financial reporting, and this is where matters of human rights fall, that is not very clear. What exactly should companies be reporting on? And then finally, I think I'll mention that because the state also does businesses, and this is of course state-owned enterprises, in ensuring that the state is promoting that duty to respect human rights, state-owned enterprises need to lead by example. So as we're calling about giving guidance to businesses, both private and public, we are expecting, of course, our state-owned enterprises to lead by example. And this means that state-owned enterprises need to have human rights policies in place. They need to have human rights due diligence mechanisms in place. And they also need to have credible grievance mechanisms in place. Because once that starts at that state level, at a state-owned enterprise level, then it becomes pretty easy for even the private sector to follow suit. Thank you.
Thank you, Clarice. I think the final question to you is that NAP has a lot of policy actions that are required, and businesses are required to abide by the rules and regulations by the UNGPs themselves broadly. What would you be doing at the state to assist businesses in compliance?
Yes, indeed. And I believe a copy of the NAP will also be shared by all the participants today. But one of the key things that the government is focused to do to help businesses to ensure they do respect human rights is by, as I said, the development of guidance tools. So this could start from the non-financial reporting guidelines that they spoke of, but also coming up with guidance models for how a business can set up credible operational grievance mechanisms, that is at a business level, tools on how to conduct human rights due diligence, because this is a new concept under the business and human rights discourse. So you'll find that there's still a challenge on how do we exactly make it practical day to day? What does that look like on the ground, both for state-owned enterprises as well as for the private companies? So coming up with those guidance tools is one of the ways the government will support businesses. Another way, of course, is through capacity building and dissemination. There's a lot of expertise in this area, not just from the government, but even from our various partners. So this is another way that the government will support businesses through, of course, ensuring that their capacity is built, that they do understand it is very good to respect business, human rights, that human rights are actually good for businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Clarice. Businesses present, please don't run away from it. The government will work hand in hand with you and assist you where you find difficulties. I'll go to Cyrus Mawewe. You may not be very far from what Clarice has said, but let us go to the non-judicial mechanism, state-based non-judicial mechanism that gets HRDs. Probably you can just highlight how you come in terms of access to revenue as a non-judicial state-based mechanism.
Thank you, Wanda, and the observation is accurate. So I build on what Clarice has already pointed out. But just to point out that in terms of access to remedy, the starting point is that for every violation, there must be a remedy. And the United Nations Guiding Principles, as well as our National Action Plan, appreciates that by providing for Pillar 3, which is access to remedy, in the event that either the state or the corporates have occasioned by their operations human rights violations. The Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, as a non-judicial state-based mechanism, will be playing a complementary role to what the state is doing in terms of facilitating access to remedy. There are instances where directly the Commission can get involved in facilitating access to remedy, or indirectly in contributing towards access to remedy where violations have occurred. And this is done through a number of interventions. I can just highlight a few. The National Human Rights Commission accepts and receives complaints, and these complaints could be touching on matters related to violations by the business sector. And upon receiving and analyzing those complaints, there are those that might warrant further interventions by the NHRI, and those interventions will be geared towards redressing the violations that will be disclosed. So there are those cases where the Commission would be doing investigations, and over and above doing that, seeking remedies, either through the judicial mechanisms, by filing cases or even supporting cases that are initiated by other actors, basically to ensure there's a redress for those violations. The Commission does alternative dispute resolution, and I'm happy that even today we have members of the National Steering Committee for the implementation of alternative justice systems. And this is also another way of ensuring that even those who cannot access the formal justice mechanisms, the judicial ones, also have a fallback mechanism where they can have their disputes either subjected to mediation, conciliation, negotiation, for purposes of enhancing access to remedy. And the Commission will and is also building capacities of both the state duty bearers as well as the rights holders to ensure that they have a very good appreciation of what their rights are and the different redress mechanisms that are available for the violations. Again, cases of possible research into the existing gaps as we support implementation of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, even as we move towards review, then from the lessons that we have learned, we'll be able to better propose mechanisms that can enhance access to remedy.
Thank you, Cyrus. You began with a very tough statement. Every violation or abuse must receive remedy. Every complaint must receive. And you have mentioned duty bearers, you have also mentioned victims. I'm sure when the Commission calls a business, the first exclamation is, Jesus, what have I done? What have we done? So it seems more adversarial. But from our mandate, or from your mandate, sorry, I work with the National Commission, so I forget I'm a panelist and join Cyrus, but I hope you excuse me. From the mandate, there's the other softer side of bringing businesses on board. How would you assist businesses? How would you assist businesses to comply with human rights? Their pillar 2, respect for human rights.
Thank you for that question. There are different ways, and the Commission has two broad mandates, the protection and the promotion mandate, and this the Commission cannot do alone, so it collaborates even with the business sector. And part of what the Commission is doing and will continue doing in terms of assisting the businesses to ensure they meet their obligation to respect human rights in their operations is capacity building. That is already ongoing. We've had a number of engagements with the business sector, and we continue doing that basically to ensure that they also have a better appreciation of what their obligations are under the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. Again, when it comes to how we can unpack what that corporate responsibility to respect means, as already been presented by Thomas, We've simplified the National Action Plan. We've also translated the same into Swahili, and this is basically to enhance understanding and appreciation of the different obligations of the different actors. We also very much encouraging businesses to develop operational grievance handling mechanisms within their operations, and currently we're in the process of developing model guidelines that would assist the businesses to establish these mechanisms that can, as a starting point, help them identify what the issues are, what the problems or the complaints that are being reported to them are, and also be able to look for how best they can address those violations. And then, as a commission, we should, and we are very ready to provide support should there be a call for support even from specific businesses, including even supporting them in establishing those mechanisms or addressing issues that might be of specific concern to them. National human rights institutions can periodically conduct researches on systemic things, also look at the legislation that is existing. Does it enable or does it move us towards ensuring that accountability when there are human rights violations? And to that extent, the Commission is able to give recommendations after identifying the gaps that exist on how best those gaps can be addressed. And then finally, just to complement the efforts of the state, because this is a journey that, as I have pointed out, the Commission cannot walk alone, and it requires a lot of stakeholder consultation, a lot of participation, a lot of joining of hands, and through that partnership, I'm sure we'll be able to support the businesses to better appreciate their role, and more significantly, implement those obligations and provide remedies when, in the unlikely event, something goes wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cyrus. I think that is clear. We can say Swahili serikali imeongea sana. Let us see whether the other actors are equally active. The Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, since the adoption of NAP, and it's a member of the implementation committee, has been very active in the Commission, in the Department of Justice and other actors in ensuring that the issues highlighted in NAP come to bear, that they are productive in the business sector. I don't know whether it's through coercion or you are convinced that there are benefits of NAP in the business sector. So, Nyangweso, the CEO of KNC, do you see any opportunities for businesses as far as NAP is concerned?
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. I think this is a very healthy discussion because the National Action Plan, the first agency to take it out of the boardrooms or the streets of Nairobi is Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And to us, I think we have really learned a lot. There are several opportunities, of course, some challenges are also there. One thing which I want to really register with the participants and the businesses who are here, you risk nothing by practicing business and human rights within or mainstreaming the human rights within your business operations. One, as a Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, it will give you a lot of credibility. Because as we do the impact assessment, we'll be able to really communicate to the public and other stakeholders on the best practices you have adopted in your businesses. Number two, you risk nothing by adopting the principles, UN principles, guiding principles on the human business and the human rights, because you will be able to retain even your workers. When we took this discussion to Lower Eastern, that is Makueni, Kitui, and Machakos, we were able to register a lot of issues that are happening within the business frameworks. at mashinani level, mashinani for the ones who are not Swahili speakers, that is up to the sub-national level. And these are candid issues that all of us as stakeholders must really come on board. Before I even talk about opportunities, low level of education and awareness is very, very critical. And this is what stakeholders really need to have a candid discussion. How do we get resources to take the National Action Plan on business and human rights issues outside there? Because if you go, when we also had another discussion in the Lake Region Economic Bloc, who are hosted by Kisumu County Government and also businesses in the Lake Region, same cross-cutting issues were registered. And I'm happy that we do this with the Danish Institute for Human Rights. We also had one in a lower South Rift, and were hosted by Nakuru County Government. A lot of issues. Now, what do we need to do differently? The national government, I liked what Kibuja presented, but we must take it outside there. Let's engage all stakeholders. Let's engage civil society. Let's engage business community champions. Let's engage county governments, because administration and implementation of National Action Plan, I'm telling you, is not a walk in the park. Because there would be resistance. There would be low space because other agencies, businesses, do not want to really create change. This brings me now to opportunities you asked me. For other players like development partners, GIZ is here, I'm happy they're also our partners, UNDP, we need to bring on resources to support government, because I don't think they will be in a position even to interpret and disseminate the National Action Plan to every corner of this country. There's still opportunity on innovation. How do we really rejuvenate our businesses to really be champions of issues of business and human rights? There is still opportunity for having very comprehensive stakeholders engagement nationally, so that we bring everybody on board. There's still opportunity to recruit business and human rights champions from the world level to the national level. So I'm looking at the eyes of the government agencies to engage civil societies, engage business community, engage all the BMOs, the business organizations. I've seen CAPSIS in the house, and also other players, so that we take this as our agenda. That will really create an impact, and it will really enhance on sustainability as we discuss the implementation of National Action Plan as a framework for abiding with the UN guiding principle. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bwana Nyangoso. I think the confession is that you have tested and you have noted that human rights is good for business. So you have built a very good case for business, human rights in business. You have mentioned some challenges, and that normally is the debating point. What are some of, just one or two key challenges? Although you have said there are no risks, but a challenge doesn't have to be a risk. One or two?
I think, my brother, what I would really talk is the enforcement. We must get political goodwill so that we really reach out to the potential players. I normally challenge government and even other private sector players. There is no way you will implement a policy if you don't understand your sphere or the business ecosystem. Let's have a strong database where we'll be able to identify, if you are talking of coastal region, which businesses do you want to identify to partner with you as key stakeholders to champion on this. Another key challenge here is the constraints, financial constraints. I don't think even as a national government, you are ready, or even the Office of Attorney, you have sufficient resources. That is why I called upon all stakeholders to really support you. Whatever, be it human resource, be it financial resources, that is very, very key. Another key challenge which is very critical, how do we take this package beyond Panari? So today we'll have a Panari declaration that we must have a systematic rollout strategy for the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. How do we package the materials we have, what Kibundi presented here? Who understands it if you go to Samburu? Who understands it if you go to the farms in West Pokot? Who understands it if you go to the sugar cane belt areas, for example? Who understands it if you go to the mining zones of Taita Taveta and even other areas, the Migori section and other parts of this country? That is very, very, very critical. Thank you.
My take is that there is no challenge for businesses, there is challenge for government, for development agencies to assist us. And therefore there is, for me, from listening to the CEO.
Well, let me add something on the businesses. There is element of change of attitude for the businesses. The employers, the industry players, in your policies, have you really embraced human rights? Do you have sections within your businesses where you can candidly say we really practice this principle? That is a key challenge. The resistance comes from the private sector and also the government institutions. For the government institutions, how fast do you respond to issues if they are reported? For the manufacturing firms, for example, how well do you engage your consumers or your potential customers on issues of human rights in your businesses? That's very, very, very key. How do you communicate it out? How do you voice out? Do you document? Do you partner with the relevant government institutions, starting from the local police station, chief's office, local administrators, human rights champions and advocates? That's very, very key. So this is a very complex ecosystem that all of us must really roll up our sleeves to make it a reality. I'll tell you, I have more than 1 decade experience engaging businesses in this country. The small-scale players like SMEs, do they have financial stability to take this discussion to the next level? We must reach out to them. We must do capacity building to them. We must give them a package so that they can interpret those pillars we are presenting today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bwana Nyangweso. I think the work of the National Commission on Human Rights is to make that complex environment easy for businesses to adopt human rights principles. And we have already begun that, and it will continue. Just to avoid favoritism, I will go to Judy G. Judy, I think you've been leading the preceding framework or the augmenting framework to the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. That is the Global Compact, the UN Global Compact. And you have very well transitioned or accommodated this other framework and integrated. But what do you think, for example, in your engagement, how have you changed the business landscape towards human rights from the previous engagement of business?
Yeah, thank you, Mwenda. And allow me to start first by saying I think we need to acknowledge the milestone that today is in launching the National Action Plan. For those of us who've been at it for the last couple of years, there's been a lot of work that has gone on to really sensitize the Kenyan public on the importance of issues of business and human rights. So coming back to the UN Global Compact, for those of you who might not know us, We are the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative anchored in the UN with the mandate to support businesses to integrate or embed responsible business conduct within their strategies as well as operations. The Global Compact is a global body, but we have presence in over 80 countries across the globe, and we do have presence here in Kenya, working with about 300 signatory companies that have made a commitment to advance responsible business conduct, guided by the 4 key pillars around human rights, labor rights, environment protection, as well as anti-corruption. So Mwenda, we've been at it for quite a number of years, since 2000 when the initiative was launched by the former UN Secretary General. And we've been at the front seat to see the evolution and the understanding and the application of issues of responsible business conduct across the globe, but also within the continent here and in Kenya. And from what we've seen, there's been increasing awareness of the role of the business community to respect human rights. But we are also seeing, while there's been that commitment as well as awareness, when it comes to the practical translation of human rights through conducting risk assessments or due diligence, there still remains a gap. Within the UN Global Compact, we poll all our signatories annually to understand the extent to which they are applying their commitments to human rights. And we see that 90% of companies are saying yes, they do commit to these principles. But when we come to interrogate the issues of the application through the due diligence process, only 27% are actually conducting those due diligence and risk assessments. And this gap is actually even wider for companies that are participating or are not participants of the UN Global Compact. And so we see globally and across the continent, compliance is a strong focus of how business manifests its understanding of their corporate responsibility. But as the UN guiding principles also guides, there's an expectation to go beyond compliance. And that's why the Global Compact as a platform is also critical in helping also challenge the private sector to move beyond just ticking the box on what is required under law, but also understanding that they have a critical role to play as providers of capital, as drivers of innovation, to really advance the next level practices when it comes to issues of human rights. And we can already see quite a number of good practices, and I think as stakeholders within the room, we need to surface more of them. There's a lot of attention also as we see when violations are happening, and that's important as well to point out, but I think there are also good practices of companies really pushing the needle on what business respect for human rights should be and what should look like. So I think for our market here is also to interrogate our stakeholders in this space. How can we also better support the small and medium-sized sector, noting that one, they represent the largest segment of the businesses in the country, close to 98%, and they are also responsible for helping us really deliver on our development outcomes. So how do we bring this agenda to them, as Mr. Nyangweso said, to also really break it down that it's not a foreign concept that we're introducing. These are things that we're already practicing, but then how do we push the needle and how do we scale up action? Also appreciating that we're in the rush to really close the gap in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals in the next 7 years. So for us at the Global Compact, respect for human rights really is the foundational element or responsibilities businesses also have to meet if at all they want to say that they are contributing to the Sustainable Development Agenda. So we've been at the forefront really supporting the private sector through a number of means, beyond creating awareness, providing them with the capacity support in terms of the trainings, but also convenings around safe spaces where they can have dialogues around common challenges that they are facing. And we do see that these are conversations that are also helping them to, again, really champion and push and really present that positive peer pressure within the sector. So it's something that we are happy to do, and also collaborate across different sectors with government as well as civil society because I think as we move forward, really it's about scaling good practices going forward.
Thank you. Judy, you mentioned something very important, attraction of capital. Have you found any relationship between responsible business conduct and investments, attraction of investments?
Absolutely, Wenda, and I think the research, the empirical evidence that is out there is very clear, that there is a direct correlation between responsible business conduct and ensuring that countries have the necessary protections on human rights and their ability to attract FDI, but also their ability to really market the countries as destinations of choice when it comes to investments. And we know very well that the fundamental ways in which business is done has changed. And we are now not just competing on price and really just the quality of products, but we are also now in a situation where the global community is competing based on values. And so the human rights principles really are critical in helping states, but also the business community to be able to market countries, ensuring that these are things that we care about. And for those that we're also trying to bring on board, they're also exposed to, high, standards from where they're coming from. So if they're going to invest in our respective countries, they also want to know that these are places where they can do so without, being exposed unduly to critical risks, whether they are reputational or whether they could also result in penalties or legal liabilities. So I think for us as Kenya, and also looking at the extent to which we can market our own country destination, we need to look and to really surface the issue of values, not just the typical traditional discussions that we have. And so I think the journey that we've taken through the National Action Plan, Kenya of course being the second, actually the first country in Africa, we should be able to tell our stories a bit more and also to really communicate what we are doing, both the good but also the challenges that we're facing and what we are doing to respond to those things.
Thank you very much, Judy, for that elaboration of exactly why businesses will attract investments, capital, if they are compliant. Now, we can't talk of the journey here without talking about civil society organizations. From the days of the 1970s and the agitation for accountability for multinationals, the demand for development of a code of conduct, and here we are. Not a code of conduct, but we are guiding principles. And I go to Mary Campbell from Kenya Human Rights Commission, a civil society organization and government organization. What role? I know you sniff a lot where there are human rights violations and you quickly amplify them and call for action. But just consolidate the role of civil society organizations in this development.
All right, thank you, Mwenda. I'm not sure whether Mwenda just called us a sniffer dog. I want to assume that we will pick that after this. But just to mention that, of course, Kenya Human Rights Commission has been involved in achieving this milestone that we're celebrating today. We have actually been in the process from the beginning, from the very initial meeting. So, I mean, that's a commitment for civil society also, working very closely with the government and other key stakeholders to ensure that we're getting where we are today. And really for us, it's a big thing to see the government committing in this kind of way. That, I mean, there's this kind of huge commitment that the state will protect human rights, but also to pronounce very articulately the obligation of businesses to ensure that they respect human rights. That's very important because we are coming a very long way as a country to get where we are. We've seen, we don't sniff, we've seen recently the BBC, the BBC expose on the violations, sexual harassment violations that were happening recently in the tea industry, the tea sector in Kenya. We have been involved in actually supporting businesses, but also working very closely with host communities and workers, because as a commission, we stand between power and powerlessness. When violations happen, the person who is on the receiving end is not the company, it is the worker, it is the host community person. So when we come in as a non-governmental organization, it is because we are acutely aware of the power imbalance that is so apparent where violations are perpetrated by companies. And therefore, our obligation is to slow this gap in terms of enhancing protections for the most afflicted. And in most cases, more often than not, it is that worker. What opportunities do we see? Let me begin with what we have done. I think it's important to say, long before the UN guiding principles were anonymously adopted by the UN Human Rights Council, the Kenya Human Rights Commission has done a lot of work to ensure that workers' rights, host communities' rights are protected are respected by businesses, of course also protected by the state. I've seen Steve Ouma here, and I'm really happy to see him here, and my director, Malombe, because they've done a lot of work in the cut flower sector. Today, the workers in the flower sector will tell you the benefits they enjoy today. Many of them are thanks to the Kenya Human Rights Commission, where we talk about, for example, access to clean drinking water, transportation for these flower farm workers. Most of them will live very far from the farms and have been raped by men, because by the time they get to the flower farms, they face a lot of risks and dangers. So a lot of that has happened because of the campaigns of the early 90s. A lot of what you see today in Del Monte, for example, it is because of campaigns that were led by the Kenya Human Rights Commission. So the place of the civil society becomes very, very integral as far as this conversation is concerned. In 2018, all of us woke up to shocking news of a quiet village being swept away by a whole dam. And everybody was initially made to believe that it was an act of God. I mean, there were heavy rains, and so the bursting of the dam was inevitable. But once we went on the ground, conducted a fact-finding mission, we found that workers in the company, host community members, had been reporting about seeping waters, about widening, the walls cracking within the dams, but nothing was done. Had something been done, 50 lives that were lost would have been saved. That's how the place of civil society comes in. That is the unique place that we continue to hold in this space. In Bangladesh, let me just divert a bit. In Bangladesh, we saw a building collapsing, the Rana Plaza, and killing over 1,000 workers. Ministry of Labor in that country had gone and given a clean bill of health in as far as audit processes are concerned. If processes were done right, if audits were commissioned in the right way and processes done right, 1,000 lives would have been saved. So, instead of looking at the commission as a sniffer dog, you can see that we hold a very unique place, because, in fact, we like to look at things from a very preventative angle. When we come in, we're supporting workers also to understand that businesses have an obligation to respect rights and to ensure that they do not impact on these rights. And where these rights are impacted, businesses have an obligation to ensure that they mitigate on these risks. So it's important that this conversation is happening today. I'm really proud of this country to be making these commitments today and to be sharing a platform today with businesses, with the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and the Global Compact, that are bringing businesses together and saying that businesses are committing to respect rights. That's very important. You've seen what's happening in the flower sector, we've seen what's happening in the horticulture sector, and there's a lot of awareness now and a lot of alertness. You will see that there's litigation happening, not just nationally, but also companies here being sued in other territories, because extraterritorial obligations are now more clear than ever before. So even if our courts will not hold you to account for violating a right, you are likely to face a legal suit elsewhere. So I mean, that's why it's important that we continue to prevent instead of waiting for harm to occur. Right now, the European Commission has released a mandatory, not really, well, a corporate sustainability due diligence directive, and a lot of the West is talking about mandatory human rights due diligence. So we are at a place where due diligence will be mandatory, whether we make it mandatory in Kenya or not. We have companies here that are selling supplies, food, horticulture to the West, and because they are subsidiaries in most cases or just involved within the supply chain, they will be required that they have to undertake due diligence. So you are required to ensure that your supply chains are out of risk. That is what the West is looking for. So we will be at a place where vegetables cannot be sourced from Kenya if our companies cannot obligate human rights. So that's why this conversation is very important, and it must be expanded to that kind of sense. Thank you, Mwenda.
You've seen for yourselves that civil society has spoken. I don't have to add to that. And Steve, I was hoping you to be mentioned, but now that you have been mentioned, we can meet for a bipartisan. So that I can clarify that sniffing is equivalent to human rights due diligence. Then we can see how that moves. When you say speaking truth to power, and I know we are running out of time, human rights is about speaking truth to power. One or two risks that you encounter in the process of speaking truth to power. One or two. Don't get.
I will say only one, in fact. That now corporates are equally getting very aggressive in the face of accountability, and now we are aware of what's happening in terms of SLAPP suits, that strategic lawsuits against public participation. So we're seeing corporates now suing human rights institutions such as the Kenya Human Rights Commission. We have recently faced a suit in the courts. We have seen corporates suing human rights defenders, environmental defenders. That's the biggest risk that we face, and other human rights, defenders and activists who fight for rights.
Thank you, Mary. Clarice, you had to close because you need to give us the trends in the world as custodians of the human rights mandate and the work you have done, and we must acknowledge that work supporting the development of NAP and all that. What do you see emerging in the global trends? In Africa, we are already #1, Kenya. We have developed this, and we are giving it a lot of meat, and everyone is looking at to us. What do you see ahead?
Thank you very much, Mwenda. I think just to, first of all, to acknowledge that it's 12 years since the UNDPs were adopted by the UN member states. And just to mention that the uptake of the UNDPs started on a very slow note. And if you look at what we have currently, it's only just about 30 countries that have adopted the UNDPs and domesticated it at the national level. And about 26 are also in the process of developing maps for their countries. I think unfortunately, it's very clear that in Africa we are lagging behind. Because if you look at the 30 countries that have adopted maps in their countries to align to the UNDPs, you'll see that out of the 30, only about 3 come from Africa. And in Africa, it's only Kenya that has gone ahead to actually adopt ANAP. So really there's a very slow uptake within Africa, despite the fact that a lot of violations actually take place in Africa. Secondly, I think it's just the misconception from businesses. And I think it was mentioned here that about 90% of businesses in Kenya, in African countries, are small micro enterprises. And unfortunately, they don't see themselves as businesses. They see themselves as rights holders, those who should claim from the government. Meaning, they don't see why they should ideally be putting in place mechanisms to implement the UNGPs and I think this is one place that the government really needs to also focus on and to do a lot of capacity building, trainings, so that SMEs can also appreciate that this is not just something meant for who they call the big brothers, the big businesses, but it's meant for everyone. I think the other challenge I'm seeing is really as regards ownership. I don't see the government also coming out, to show full ownership of the NAP. I would have wanted to see a lot of businesses run by the government here today, even as we launch the NAP. Because really, in Kenya, again, government is the biggest player in the business sector. So I think one of the things that we really need to focus on, especially from the government side, is ownership and being the role model in terms of how to implement the NAP in the UNGPs. Then also, I think also a lot of misconception from businesses on, you're introducing additional reporting structures, it's going to be very costly to put in place mechanisms to implement the UNGPs. So really a lot of work with the businesses to appreciate that it's not going to be business as usual, and this had better be part of their internal mechanisms to implement the UNGPs. So really a lot of work cut out for the government, but also for businesses in terms of ensuring that, ownership comes from the top level of the government. And maybe just to say, in terms of our work as the UN, I think part of what we have done is really to support the government to acknowledge and to implement its human rights obligations. And just to say that the adoption of the NAP actually came from the work that had been done with UN human rights mechanisms, where Kenya was supported to engage with the mechanisms and to accept to put in place the policy. So really from the UN side, a lot of work is really still cut out for us to support the government, to support businesses, but also to bridge the gap between businesses, government, and with civil society actors to ensure that we are all at the same level in terms of appreciating what UNGPs really mean for businesses, but also for human rights in Kenya.
Thank you very much, Gladys. I think the dominant point to carry from here is the consensus across the actors, including civil society organizations and businesses, that there is progress. There is need for more dialogue. There is need for more engagement. There is need for more education, capacity building, and all that. But let me not say it for them. We are within our hour, so 1 minute or so for each panelist to give something. Then I will give the CEO of Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Do you have Mama Mbogas and the border guys in here? And those are your biggest words. So you'll tell us how we are going to empower Mama Mboga and Baba Mboga. Because I don't mean that empowerment, I mean in terms of compliance and business and human rights. But the point is, the supply chain issue could make you disqualified from your higher supply if your Mama Mboga is not compliant. And I think that's what we want to understand. And Steve is a public intellectual who has offered sometimes free lessons on how to comply and explain the supply chain thing and explain the new concept, the spheres of impact. Very good. So, Cyrus, I'll begin with you, sir. We move methodically, coming to me to end the meeting, the panel discussion. Just your closing comments.
Thank you, Mwenda. My final appeal is to everyone, as I had already pointed out. We've taken quite some good steps. The efforts have paid clearly. We are not where we were when we were starting, but we still have a long way to go. Implementation is what counts, and this implementation is the role of everyone. Everyone has a role to play, as you will be able to see in the National Action Plan. It clearly identifies the role of the state, the role of the businesses, and even the public. Again, we all appreciate that there is very low levels of awareness on this document. We've been already challenged to take it out of Panari. So that's also another challenge, and I will throw the challenge to everyone. How best can we reach out even to the Mama Bogas and the Baba Bogas that you have in mind, so that we all have a very clear appreciation of what our roles are and how best we can move towards implementation with the document that we are launching today. Of course, I must also celebrate and appreciate the efforts of everyone. It's been a journey, and I look forward to a better journey towards compliance and actual implementation, so that the people can now practically get to enjoy the rights that the NAP seeks to uphold and protect for them. Thank you.
For me, my parting shot is this. From when this process began, one of the key highlights has always been the level of dialogue and consensus that has been there in the players involved. So that has been one of our success stories. The fact that we are not just doing this as government in silo, or the commission in silo, or CSOs in silo, but that partnership has been very key to get us where we are today. So my parting shot is, let us continue in that partnership, in that dialogue process. Let us simplify these concepts, because these are very important concepts which perhaps may appear quite convoluted, quite difficult. When you throw human rights due diligence to an SME, of course, you're just scaring them. But let's simplify this, let's work together. And as government, of course, we are very committed to ensuring that this conversation continues, and that that we continue to also sensitize even our own actors, as you well put it, Clarice, starting with our own state-owned enterprises. That is a key priority for us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So from me, I think as we move out of here and go into the next phase of implementation, my call to action would be for each and every one of us from our respective organizations and wherever we are operating from, let's create the necessary pressure points to really dial up the need for why we need to scale up action on business and human rights. And we all have those levers, whether we are employers or whether we are actors within our respective spaces. I think we need to take ownership at that personal and individual level to make this whole agenda make sense, and also make it really take center stage for the different stakeholders who have the responsibilities to take action. So from us at the Global Compact is also to call on the business community who might be struggling and trying to figure out where do we start and where can we plug in. The support is already there, so nobody needs to struggle and grope in the dark trying to figure out where do we begin on this journey. The support is available. The onus is on you to plug in.
Thank you. I will end from where I started, where I said, I think we've come a long way as a country. We've come a long way because we have been where labor was a mere factor of production to a point where labor, that is workers, both communities, are an integral part of the entire supply chain. That's where we are, and it's good to see businesses really coming to that realization. I think it's a good place. However, I don't think a proliferation of laws and policies will necessarily cure the problem. There is more work to be done, and that work entails implementation, so that we are not just taking pride in being the first country in Africa to have an app, but a country that will implement this particular framework. Thank you.
Thank you. I think from us, the parting shot is that let's look at human rights as really doing, as being the right thing to do, rather than looking at the cost implications of putting in place mechanisms to address human rights. Because the truth is that the flip side is that implications of non-compliance can be very high. Today I was just listening to news, and I saw that Goldman Sachs is going to pay 2,800 women $50,000 each for failing to implement equal pay for both genders. And you can do the math, what that means, $50,000 for 2,800 women. So, the flip side of non-compliance is really, the risk of bringing your business down, not just reputationally, but also in terms of the costs of your business. So on behalf of the UN, we still are committed to supporting the national actors to put in place, contextualized mechanisms that will help us to implement the UNGPs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mwenda. Thank you so much, fellow panelists. The message is very clear. On behalf of the private sector players, we know that the NAP aligns itself to international standards, and I want to challenge all businesses to take this discussion to the next level, mainstream within your business operations, the NAP. It's a very good strategy. That is how Chamber or other agency will be able to identify you, the markets for your products, if you are compliant to the NAP. Number two, let's really reduce the risk management. Let's have a strategy for risk management in our businesses, because this is also aligned within the NAP. So for the mama mbogas and the baba mbogas and the small-scale farmers, the message is very clear. These things, the NAP and business and the human rights issues begins with us. You need to really be an advocate. Don't wait for Mwenda to come from Nairobi or Patrick or a UNDP official to really ensure that you really adopt what has already been discussed within the strategy. Because at the end of the day, look at how it really affects our businesses. If you are a small-scale producer of mbogas or vegetables, if you are using sewer line waters to grow sukuma wiki, and in your own mind, you want to supply this to a local secondary school where your daughter is or your nephew, son is, in your mind, let's first of all sit around our farms. If you want to really have a high mix of even pesticides, and you are growing tomatoes, and you want to take this to the market, it begins with you. As your representatives will be able to advocate for you according to the business environment, but we really call upon you to be the ambassadors, to be the champions for the implementation of the NAP. Last thing, Mwenda. Shady Embassy, we really want to thank you for really holding our hands. As Chamber, we are committed. And I want to tell you from June, you will be seeing us hitting the ground, doing sensitization, capacity building, and also offering the technical support to the implementation of NAP. We have started this. My legal officer is there, Joyce just stand up so that they see you. We are going to comp this nation in the 10 regions. So join us, we are ready. And there's opportunity to improve on your reputation for your businesses and your institution as regard to the UN guiding principle on business and human rights. Thank you so much for recognizing some of us to be here with you. And I look forward to work with you in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, panelists, I think the issues are out there. But the role of a moderator sometimes is to see the things that were not said. And everyone was saying we are ready to go. Like some people have food to cook, but they have no fire. And we have seen development partners here. These people are saying, if you help us, don't get tired of helping us. Please also join, because the development partners, various embassies who are here, they have really gone a long way in helping achieve this agenda. And we are almost halfway the mark. We are beginning the next stage. Therefore, we still welcome you so that we are able to move the agenda forward. So I borrowed for you, you don't have to do it again. That's ideal. With those many remarks, I wish to thank all of us and thank you for your attention. Thanks.
Let's give them another round of applause. Thank you very much, the panelists, for highlighting very significant ideas for all of us as we launch the NAP today. We now move to the next level of speeches, and I will be calling on those on the program to come to the podium and make their remarks. Your Excellency, the Ambassador of Norway in Kenya, Andreas Horn, please take the floor.
Sorry for fidgeting, but I just needed to find some data that I want to use as a reference as well. Good morning, I'm Jambo. Very pleased to be here, and I think it's 2 weeks ago since some of us were in a similar event. Then it was the Scandinavian Kenya business event, basically focusing on what we're discussing here today as well. And I think it's very, first of all, very happy to be here with the formal launching of the National Action Plan. For Norway, this started back in 2015 with the, we already heard about the UPR that really started the process in Kenya. And that was also the start of the dialogue between Kenya and Norway on how we could partner and work together, walking together, as my friend called it. So today, with the launch of the National Action Plan, we see the final result. And as you've already heard, Kenya being the first country in Africa, there will be a formal launch a little bit later, but I still think that deserves a little bit of applause for Kenya. I'm very impressed by the seriousness and the speed this has taken. 6-7 years since the process really started, and until the finalization. Thank you, it was getting really cold in here. Norway, CSO started this process in Norway, lobbying for something similar. It took almost 20 years before the act was passed in Parliament in 2022. So it means that this is it's a cumbersome process, but it also shows the importance of, as we heard today from the panel. By the way, very thanks a lot to the panel. Brilliant panelists, and I really learned a lot from listening to them. The role of the CSOs and the dialogue and the partnership between all the various stakeholders here, businesses, CSOs, governments, everyone, to be able to drive this process forward. Just to put on, I mean, a lot of good things have been said already here, so I would just jump to a few things, and I think that is important, and that is, first of all, a national action plan, a tool like this. Yes, there is an oversight, and yes, there is can be seen from businesses as a kind of a punishment aspect to it. But if you turn that around and say, okay, but what about if you meet these requirements and you meet these standards and you use that in developing your business, you use it in developing your products, you use it in branding your business, look at it as an ISO certificate way of doing business. And that takes me to what Mary spoke about, the due diligence. And that's why I wanted to find here in the Norwegian Act. It says, which is about right to information, meaning that I, as an individual, have the right to know what companies are doing. And Section 5 in the Act says duty to account for due diligence. First of all, Section 4, duty to carry out the due diligence. Section 5, duty to account for the due diligence. You have to publish it. And then my right as a citizen to ask and to request what has actually been done with regards to human rights or environment and working conditions. So this makes the link between a medium-sized company in Kenya and Norway, because if the company here is a subcontractor or sells products or services to a company in Norway, that's the link. Then it is linked to the Norwegian legislation. So all of this is linked together, and I think that's what we need to see in order for this really to take place. And also thanks for very powerful encouragement to companies in Kenya from our friend here on really to take this seriously and to get on board and see how you can do in your way. And there are differences between micro companies and the big internationals. We have to realize that as well. Just also then a little bit of, when we look at what has happened to companies who have neglected this. Big Swedish company, Hennes & Mauritz, we have Nike, we have examples of what happens if you have been sleeping in the class and not been taking this seriously enough. But once again, just to say that I'm very happy that we have been able to work with Kenya since 2015. The National Action Plan is here, the NAP. Excuse my silly pun, but this is not the time to nap. Now it is time to wake up and move. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for reminding us not to nap, but we will wake up. Let me now call upon Lee, Senior Human Rights Advisor, also the High Commissioner for Human Rights, to take the floor.
Good morning, everybody, and really it is such a pleasure to be here today at a really momentous occasion, as everyone has said. And I think that this is, it's a key marker. In some ways it's a culminating point, but in other ways it's the start of another journey. And it is part of a long journey that we have walked together, as the Norwegian ambassador just said. And I think that it's good to note again, coming back to that 2015 Universal Periodic Review, the power of the human rights mechanisms in actually bringing together these recommendations from peers to other countries, and then the action that Kenya has taken in taking this forward as a country, and being the first country in Africa to develop a national action plan on business and human rights. And as the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, we've been really, really pleased to be able to walk along this journey since 2015. And really, the active period between 2016 and 2018, walking along and providing support to the inclusive process of the development of the National Action Plan in order to be able to implement the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And I think the participation today and those who were involved in the process really demonstrates why we need to all come together as a whole, as government, as private sector, as independent institutions, as civil society, and as international community partners to be able to support this process. And I think that now, I mean, with the finalisation of the draft in 2019, but also a lot of the preparatory work that came before this, the formal adoption by Parliament last year, and now today the launch, the implementation committee, the roadmap for implementing, and looking at how the capacity building has been done for businesses through Global Compact. This is an important, a very important process to continue. And I think it's on the issue of human rights due diligence. This is really something that we hold very close. as the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and we stand ready to continue this journey, drawing upon the expertise that has that we have as a global entity, and to bring this into the process. Also trying to involve again the Working Group on Business and Human Rights, who played such an important role in the development of the map here in Kenya. So just as we are here today, coming together across all of our different sectors, I think I really want to be able to congratulate Kenya and to Kenyan actors and institutions on this point in the marking, and to say that this is really just the launch of another stage, which is the implementation of the map. And here, as others have said, it's about how state-owned enterprises, but also private enterprises, can move forward on making this a reality on the ground. But this really requires partnership from all of us who are here today. And on behalf of OHCHR, we just want to recommit ourselves to this partnership. Asanteni sana.
Thank you very much, Lee. I now invite Dr. Dan Juma, UNDP.
Thank you very much. Ordinarily, I would not have spoken after my senior, but because I am reading this on behalf of Anthony Ngororano, the resident representative of UNDP. He sends me with 3 messages, apologies on his behalf for not making it. One, I think he is reminding us that we are in the midpoint of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. And if you recall, really, these goals adopted in 2015, and we are in 2023, which means we only have 7 more years. Now, if you look at the issues that were already coming up in terms of the pillars, but also in terms of the thematic areas, you will recognize that the Business and Human Rights National Action Plan will be very, very important for us as an accelerator for realizing the SDGs. In particular, the SDG relating to gender equality. I think those issues were already coming out here. Issues of decent work and economic growth, issues of health and well-being, issues of leaving no one behind, and of course, access to justice. So we really want to emphasize the need for us to also see how this can be one of the accelerators for the SDGs. I think the second point that he is really reminding us, and I think that is already coming out here very clearly, is that business and human rights, when we were talking about the HRDD, the human rights due diligence, it can look abstract. But I think it's coming out very, very clearly that it is not from the remarks made by the ambassador and everybody else who's spoken. The juice that you take there, just before, as we were having that, having this meeting. Now, the work that was done by our progenitors, Willie Mutunga, Wamboi Kimathi, Francesco Giuseppe, and Steve Ouma was here with us in 2001, was titled When Pineapples Kill. This was a study of the state of human rights of the workers in Del Monte. And they unearthed really some very, very atrocious activities happening to those who produce the juice that we are having here. And so that reminds us, of the reality of what we're working with, and the need for us to take this really and to democratize it as we go on with the implementation. And I'm very happy to see this already translated here, and I think it was also coming out from the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce that now the next stage is also to see how this can be democratized and taken out there to the field, so that the different stakeholders can engage. And I think to my last point, which is implied in just the point I was mentioning about democratizing and making sure that we move to the implementation and leave no one behind, is the multi-stakeholder approach. Now, that report of 2001 that was done by the Kenya Human Rights Commission that I allude to was actually done way before even the government had appropriated this. And we really want to laud, of course, the government now for taking the leadership ever since 2015, and of course before that, towards advancing human rights. If you recall, Kenya also is one of the countries to do a national human rights policy and action plan, the broader generic. And so this national action plan on business and human rights, I think, will deepen. But I think the point I'm trying to raise is the importance of partnerships, collaboration. And so from the UN side, I think UNDP, OHCHR, and other agencies will work very, very closely to make sure this will happen. But I also want to encourage the development partners and Ambassador Guna, I think maybe if I can just put a word, that some of that work actually that happened way before this work began, the support to KHRC, Kenya Human Rights Commission, was through the support that they were getting from bilaterals such as Norway, Finland, Sweden is here, the Danish are here. So let's see, German, the Embassy of Germany and so forth. So let's just see how we can be able to take this forward through the implementation committee, the working groups alluded to by Lee, and all the structures that we have to move this forward. I think that's what I want to say, and to thank you very, very sincerely on behalf of UNDP for this milestone, and not to forget the Embassy of Japan that has provided support to UNDP to do a project on this, not just in Kenya, but also in 18 other countries across the globe. So I want to thank you very much also for the opportunity for the partnership with the Office of the Attorney General and the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Now, I take the opportunity to welcome Mary Ann Njau Kimani, Secretary of Justice and Consumer Affairs, to make her remarks. Karibu.
Good morning. You allow me to be a little bit formal than my predecessors, because I want to read a speech by Honorable Shadrach Mose, the Solicitor General, who actually got a personal tragedy, so couldn't have been with us today. So you allow me to be a bit formal. So Your Excellency, Ambassador Ghana of Norway, Your Excellencies, representatives of the embassies of Sweden, Germany, the British High Commission, the embassies of Denmark, Switzerland, Austria, Netherlands, the chairperson, Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, Li Fang, Senior Human Rights Advisor, the UNDP representative, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. So as I read, I will read as the Solicitor General. It is indeed my pleasure to be here with you all today as we launch our National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. We cannot take for granted the work that has gone into the development of this policy document and the support that we have received from a lot of organizations. In a special way, I wish to extend my deepest appreciation to the Norwegian Embassy in Denmark through the Danish Institute for Human Rights for all the support offered towards the development of the NAP. I also appreciate all the officers from the different agencies who are part of the National Steering Committee that oversaw the development of this document. Civil society organizations, the private sector, and the UN, ably represented by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Kenya Office, to our partners at the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, we thank you all for the wonderful partnership and support. Collaboration between government agencies and the national human rights institutions is a clear indication of the willingness of the government to promote, respect, protect, and fulfill the human rights of its people. Finally, but not least, we appreciate the support of the UN Global Compact, the Embassy of Japan, and the UNDP, who have supported part of the implementation of the NAP as well as its launch. Ladies and gentlemen, we will recall that in 2011, the UNGPs were unanimously adopted. And we have been reminded today that UNGPs apply to all states and to all businesses, irrespective of their size, sector, location, ownership, and structure. And again, we've been told that even in Africa, the issue of implementing the UNGPs is finally picking up a bit, as we've been told, slowly. But I want to concentrate on why we think that Kenya adopted the NAP. The NAP, the most important and compelling reason, I've skipped a lot of the information that you have had. Much as I said, I'll read as he put it. I thought, let me not bore you again with everything that you've had before, but let me emphasize some things he has emphasized as well. The most important and compelling reason that Kenya adopted a NAP is to be found in the Constitution of Kenya, which has laid the normative framework for corporate respect for human rights in Kenya. It explicitly provides for the responsibilities of business with respect to human rights. Article 20 of our Constitution provides that the Bill of Rights binds all organs of state and all persons. Article 260 of the Constitution defines a person to include a company, association, or other body of persons, whether incorporated or unincorporated. Hence, the Constitution emphasizes a role for business enterprises with regards to human rights in tandem with emerging global norms, which recognize that businesses share in the responsibility for human rights. Again, the Kenyan NAP is also in tandem with obligations under the regional and international human rights instruments that Kenya is a state party to. For example, under the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the protocols thereto, states are obligated to have adequate legal and institutional frameworks to respect, protect, and fulfill children's rights, and to provide remedies in case of violations in the context of business activities and operations. The UN Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women also has issued a general recommendation for states to engage non-state actors, including businesses, to prevent abuses regarding their activities in conflict-related affected areas, particularly regarding all forms of gender-based violence. They must also provide adequate assistance to businesses to assess and address the heightened risk of abuse in conflict-affected areas and establish effective accountability mechanisms. So therefore, what Kenya is saying through its NAP is that to fulfill these human rights obligations, the state requires the cooperation of business. Thirdly, like you have been told, in line with Kenya's human rights obligations also, Kenya was reviewed under the UN Human Rights Universal Periodic Review second cycle in January 2015. And during Kenya's review, you've been told, led by Norway, Kenya was given a recommendation to develop a NAP. And in keeping again with working with us, all partners, we agreed to commence the drafting of the NAP. The SG also has recognized, the Environment, Society and Governance Directive that is now, that affects whatever is happening. because whatever is happening in the European Union, like we were told, because of the supply chain, this is something that we also need to take seriously. But I will not bore you again because Ambassador Ghana already gave you the story behind it. In addition, and this I think is what also has come out from the discussions we had today, in addition to the NAP, Kenya also has in place laws which impose various obligations to act with due diligence with regards to issues surrounding environmental protection, money laundering and corruption, consumer protection, and human trafficking. Again, we were told some of the issues, some of the guidelines that some businesses, some government-owned institutions are putting in place to ensure that businesses are not caught on the wrong side of the law. So, like we were told again by Kubuja this morning, NAP is not creating new obligations, but we just want to help businesses, both state-owned and privately owned, to comply with the law. And you've been told how expensive it will be, how non-compliance, turns out to be expensive. So, looking at the above, we are convinced that the National Action Plan on Business of Human Rights will help us engender human rights standards into business, impact assessments, due diligence mechanisms, and business reporting. Like we were told, conducting human rights due diligence in all spheres of a business is the cornerstone of Kenya's NAP, as it addresses business obligations under Pillar 2 of the UNGPs, all respect for human rights. This is premised on the fact that all organizations should be aware of their own actions and those of their business relationships, which may lead to negative human rights impacts. The NAP, therefore, in conclusion, will minimize the uncertainty and consistency associated with making corporate human rights responsibilities contingent upon the whims of organizations, but led themselves to more reliable processes and outcomes. And like we have been told, our NAP, Kenya's NAP, makes it clear that respecting human rights is a responsibility that requires action on the part of businesses. And organizations need to be able to demonstrate that it is indeed respecting human rights in practice, and that in turn requires them to have certain policies and processes in place. And one of the processes we were taken through is conducting a human rights due diligence. You'll also find in our NAP, apart from everything else that is in there, it also provides for the monitoring, evaluation, and reporting all the measures that businesses, will take, so that then it doesn't become a blind tool, but an active tool that at least, apart from working with businesses, ensures that we are able to monitor and also report and work again with businesses to ensure that implementation of the NAP is effective. So as I conclude, I want to thank everyone for who has worked and worked with us, and still implore that you don't tire of working with us, but help us build capacity of diverse stakeholders of the UNGPs, help us to disseminate the National Action Plan, and in a special way, help us as we work towards ensuring that all businesses then put in place mechanisms to ensure effective human rights due diligence. I thank you all. Do you want me to invite the chair? Okay. And now, kindly allow me to invite the chair, National Commission on Human Rights, to give us the keynote address.
The Secretary for Justice, Marianne Njau Kimani, representing the Solicitor General here today. Representative of the UNDP Kenya, country representative to Kenya, His Excellency Gunnar Andreas Holm, Ambassador of the Royal Norwegian Embassy in Kenya, representative of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, Ms. Lee Fan, members of the NAP Implementation Committee present, representatives of civil society organizations present, representatives from all other stakeholders present, ladies and gentlemen, good morning once again. I want to start by apologizing for arriving late for this function. It's not because I wanted to be late or disregarded the meeting. It's just that I was engaged in another official assignment before I could join you here this morning. So please accept my apologies. It gives me great pleasure and privilege to be a part of this very important occasion of the launch of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. It is noteworthy that Kenya was the first country in Africa to domesticate the United Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights through the development of this very important policy document that we are launching today. We were closely followed by our neighbors Uganda, who are in the process of also developing their National Action Plan, and there is also a third country that has already initiated the process. This National Action Plan is the culmination of a long process that involved extensive consultations with diverse stakeholders. It is a policy that demonstrates what partnerships between state and non-state actors can achieve for the common good of the country and human rights. The Kenya National Commission of Human Rights, together with the Office of the Attorney General and Department of Justice, took the initiative and provided leadership in development of the National Action Plan. The Commission and the Office of the Attorney General and Department of Justice jointly hosted the Secretariat of the National Steering Committee that was formed to spearhead this process. Allow me to thank the Royal Government of Norway for making the recommendation to Kenya to develop the National Action Plan. I'm threatened, but I am safe. During the Universal Periodic Review in 2015, maybe it's an indicator I should cut this short, I'll make it quick. The acceptance of this recommendation by the government of Kenya marked the beginning of this novel process. In addition to making the recommendation, the Royal Embassy of Norway followed up with some financial support through a grant to the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. I also wish to acknowledge the roles played by the various business sector players who joined us through their representative organizations, notably the Federation of Kenya Employers, COTU, the Central Organization of Trade Unions, and the United Nations Agencies in Nairobi and Geneva for their support. We also recognize the support of the UN Global Impact Kenya chapter, the Office of the Commissioner, the High Commissioner of Human Rights, and the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, and of course the UN. We thank you all very, very much. While celebrating the National Action Plan, I really hope that we have now just covered the easier part of the task. We now need to begin to focus on the real task, which is implementation. It will take the goodwill of all actors, again, to ensure the realization of human rights to reach this action plan. As you will notice, domesticating the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the
well as state-based non-judicial mechanisms such as through the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Non-state actors, including business and industry associations, are encouraged to establish effective operational level grievance resolution mechanisms to address adverse human rights issues. The United Nations Guiding Principles are set effectiveness criteria for the non-judicial grievance mechanisms. The mechanisms should be legitimate, accessible, predictable, equitable, transparent, rights compatible, and a source of continuous learning that must be based on engagement and dialogue. I urge all of us to ensure that the mechanisms to be set up are in conformity with these criteria. In conclusion, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights commits to carry out its mandate of protecting and promoting human rights in Kenya and in fulfillment of their responsibility even under the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and the National Action Plan that we are launching today on business and human rights. Pursuant to its mandate, the Commission will continue to advise the government on its national, regional, and international human rights obligations. The Commission will ensure the observance of human rights by all public and private institutions through, amongst others, complaint processing, monitoring compliance with human rights principles and standards, research on emerging and salient human rights issues in business, reporting to human rights mechanisms and treaty bodies on the government's fulfillment of its human rights obligation, and in building the capacities of the public and private institutions. As a redress mechanism, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights will continue to provide remedy and appropriate process. The Commission recognizes that we cannot do this alone and looks forward to the cooperation, collaboration, and commitment of all stakeholders in ensuring the observance of human rights as laid out in the Action Plan for Business and Human Rights. To this end, we appeal to the state to set aside adequate resources for the implementation of the Action Plan. I further appeal to all stakeholders to play their different roles to ensure effective implementation of this National Action Plan. We, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, remain a committed partner and fully support the implementation of the National Action Plan. I look forward to the successful implementation of this possible business opportunity. I thank you.
Chairperson, another round of applause. Thanks that you made your speech. Now, I invite Minister to come forward and we get ready for the launch of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. Minister.
Yes, I'll call a few people to come here representing various entities for the launch. So I'll call our chairperson, I'll call our CEO, I'll call the Secretary of Justice, I'll call on the Ambassador of Norway, representative of UNDP, the National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and the Kenya Human Rights Commission. They are ready to represent everyone. KHRC, Amerikambu Kucha, NCCI Joyce, Bokayo, oh, okay. They see. The ambassador stepped out, he's coming back. So the next time you will pair. The next time you will So please, everyone else feel represented here. It's the limited space, but we are all in it. So I'm told that at the count of countdown, you step away from the coming ball so that nobody is threatened. At the count, we are counting down from 5 to 4, if I'm not wrong. The moment, at the point of 0, the chair will cut the ribbon and step away. Yes. You are cutting the wire that detonates. Yes, very safe. Very safe. Okay, I'll do the countdown. If I see the chair's life is in danger, I will let the countdown. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So the cameramen don't fail our guests with a lot of photos. After this, we'll do a photo session up here. And I think we are done. So we can do a photo session. At least a representative of every organization, including public intellectuals, can come here. So please, at least a representative, Judy, go up. Madam Judy, go up. Implement. Kimani, please. That represents FKE, tunawaona escort waro, Swiss Embassy, TI, we have a whole chapter there, please go. Another representative of any other organization, Stella, please enter up, I'll grab a copy. Let's go there, you are now. Up, Clarice. Clarice, Kariuki, please go there. Now I'm dictating who goes, now that you are hiding. Please go there. UDPK is there, thank you. Play. So wale watu warefu wakae mbele, wale wafupi the other way around. So that we have 2 lines at least. Chair, you are the shorter ones. Come forward. Yes. Can you, the cameraman can advise. Yeah. Instead of seats, some people. Yes? Oh, you can just. That's great. Clarice, sit here. Where is Stella? Sorry, I'm being biased, but Stella and Clarice were the engines of the secretariat, so it's good for them to be visible. Am I here? Then we have a line, straight line here. Cameraman, the other ones were supposed to be doing this, otherwise I will mess your photo. Are we okay? So I can exit. Okay? We have names here. Where is the book? Due to public demand. So the final step, we've done the photo session for the vote of thanks. Allow me to invite the CEO, KNC Chad, to give a vote of thanks, and then we end the session. Very good to see you.
Thank you very much. We are coming to the close of the launch. Allow me to once again acknowledge the following: the Danish Embassy, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Government of Kenya, OHCHR, Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Embassy of Sweden, Embassy of Norway, German Embassy, British High Commission, representatives, Global Compact, the National Action Plan, Implementation Committee, various civil society organizations, and the citizens of Kenya, of course, who are in here. And also allow me to specifically recognize the roles played by various organizations, from the development partners. The Royal Norwegian Embassy made the recommendation and funded the entire NAP development process. We thank you very much. The Danish Institute for Human Rights, you provided the technical and financial support during the process as well. Give them a round of applause. Also, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, you provided that needed technical expertise during the process. We thank you. The UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, you provided training on the NAP development process. We thank you. The UNDP and the Embassy of Japan, you provided financial support for the dissemination of the NAP. We thank you. Allow me then to thank also the National Steering Committee, comprising of the following members: the Office of the Attorney General and the Department of Justice. Another round of applause. The Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, the Kenya Human Rights Commission, COTU, Federation of Kenya Employers, United Nations Global Compact Kenya, Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. There are also individuals who provided very critical input and supported the entire process. Professor Githu Muigai, former Attorney General, who first of all accepted the recommendation of the UPR Committee to develop the NAP. Mary Ann Njau Kimani, Secretary of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, for offering the overall technical leadership of the NAP. Allow me also to thank Patricia Nyaundi, a former CEO of Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, who initiated the process at the Commission, and when she left, I also took over to ensure the process continued. Let's thank her. Then one of our staff, Maina Mutuaruio, was heading the Economic Social Cultural Rights Division then, for initiating that particular process among the technical staff. Let's acknowledge him. And the other individuals who have always been on call and responded immediately to the action: Clarice Karaoke of DOJ, we thank you. Still now, Wangeshi, at the back there when you were at KNCHR and you have even continued at Kapusi, people don't know you. Just rise up, stand up. Thank you very much for your role in the NAP. And of course, James Mwenda, when you talk of National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights at the Commission, people then will say, where is James Mwenda? Mwenda, we thank you very much for your role. Then, of course, we thank the public and the business sector for participating in the consultative processes leading to the development of the NAP. Let's acknowledge them. And finally, let's acknowledge all those who are present here today during the launch, and especially members of the Fourth Estate, that is the media and the civil society, for being with us here today. Let's applaud them once again. So thank you very much. The list is so long, I feel I should cut it at this point and then bring the exercise to a close. Feel most welcome. There is a activity at the back there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, CEO. I know the predicament of thanking yourself. Let me do it because NAP was concluded under your tenure, and the dissemination is going on, and the leadership is intact for the same. And of course, the chair and the commissioners who have come in, they have taken the mantle, and we believe the process of dissemination and all the activities that will make this a reality will continue under the new leadership. The reality will still continue to look at it. When you fold the curtains, make sure you call us for a cup of tea so that you hand over the process officially to me. With those many remarks, thank you everyone once again, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.